Thank you so much for joining us for our Civic Season webinar series, where we have partnered with the Civic Season to celebrate civic learning and civic engagement in libraries from Juneteenth through July 4th. As a part of our Libraries 2025 initiative, through every library, we are encouraging voters to be informed about library issues before going to the ballot. Today, I am thrilled to welcome Rebekah Cummings, a former Utah Library Association president and the co-founder of Let Utah Read. Rebekah became the first librarian to run for lieutenant governor on a major party ticket in the United States. In addition to being a historic moment at the intersection of librarianship, advocacy, and public service, the selection of Rebekah as a lieutenant governor candidate highlights how book challenges have thrust librarians from the fringes of politics into the mainstream. Welcome, Rebekah, and I will pass it to you to talk a little bit more about your experience in running for office.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Sandobar, for that great introduction. And thanks to all of you for being here today. Happy Civic Season. So my name is Rebekah Cummings. I'm the Director of Digital Matters at the University of Utah Marriott Library, which you can see on the screen. And my talk for today is From Librarian to Lieutenant Governor Candidate, Lessons Learned from the Campaign Trail. Now, we are going to talk about the real, tangible things that I learned running for public office. Everything from fundraising to messaging, to learning how to protect my time, to finding new ways to define success in a race that probabilistically I was not going to win at the ballot box. But I want to be transparent right from the jump that I do have higher hopes for this presentation. Last year, I did something that scared me. Something that I did not feel remotely qualified to do. Something where I risked failing publicly and spectacularly on a daily basis. And I am so grateful for it. Now, I suspect that for every single person watching this, there is some way in your life that you are being called upon to be brave. And it might even be something that, like me, you haven't even allowed yourself to want, because wanting can feel scary or impractical or audacious. But I really hope that by sharing some of the ways that I surprised myself last year, that it encourages you to show up for yourself in huge, gutsy ways that you never expected. So let's go. So just a little over a year ago, my life changed in an instant, starting with this email right here. April 21st, 2024 started off as just a regular Sunday. We had just gotten home from church, we'd made some lunch, and we were debating our afternoon plans when all of a sudden I saw this pop up on my phone. Hi, Rebekah. I hope you're doing well. I'm reaching out in my capacity with Brian King's campaign for governor. Now, this is out of the blue, I'm sure, but we are exploring potential candidates for lieutenant governor, and we're hoping to add your name to a list of individuals to consider. We would be more than happy to find a time to chat early this week if you're at all interested in being considered. We think that you could be a great potential addition to the ticket. Let me know what you think and if you'd like to talk further. Gabby Finlayson. Now, Gabby's phrase here, out of the blue, was the understatement of the century. Unless you count running for ULA president in 2017, I had never run for nor served in public office. I wasn't a Democratic insider or a party loyalist. And in fact, as I sheepishly revealed to Brian King 2 days later, I was a registered Republican for reasons that a lot of people in Utah will understand. And even though I pride myself on my reading comprehension, I just kept thinking, I have got to be reading this wrong. There was just no way that I was being considered to be the Democratic candidate for lieutenant governor. And yet, 8 crazy whirlwind days later, these were the headlines. After interviewing, being invited to join the ticket, talking to my family and my library and having them co-sign on the decision, a crash course in candidate and media training, photo and video shoots, I went to the Utah State Capitol and I became the first librarian to run for lieutenant governor on a major party ticket in the United States. Now, in this short time that we have together today, I am not going to simply regale you with stories from the campaign trail, which admittedly would be so much fun for me, but probably not all that useful for you. Instead, I want to offer 8 reflections, 8 lessons that I learned running a campaign for statewide office, which could not have been more different than my daily life as a mom and a librarian. Now, like many of you, I'm a big reader. And one of the things that I've always loved about fiction is that it gives you this opportunity to leave your world and to temporarily inhabit another one, where you get to have different experiences and meet different people. And then somehow you return back to your own world slightly changed. Now, diving headfirst into the political world for 7 months felt very much to me like immersive fiction on steroids. And now I'm back, and I am so eager to share the things that I learned that I think will have resonance and applicability far beyond politics. But before we jump into all that, I just want to give you an opportunity for some reflection as well. As I said at the start of this talk really is at its heart a call to courage, to pursue something that scares you. Something that, quite frankly, I think the world needs you to do. Maybe it's writing a book or asking for a raise. Maybe it's having an overdue conversation. Maybe it's telling someone you're sorry. Maybe it is pursuing a different degree or starting a new business or leaving a bad relationship or having the courage to put yourself out there and to start a new one. Courage is going to look different for all of us. Sometimes courage is saying yes, and sometimes courage is saying no. So before we jump into the rest of this talk, I just want you to take a second to ask yourself these 3 questions. 1, in what way or ways are you being gutsy in this season of your life? 2, in what ways do you want to be? And 3, what's stopping you? Now, feel free to pause this video and write down your answers. If you're watching with a friend, feel free to pause and just talk a little bit about this, because I think these questions are so important. Or even just take a screenshot and come back to this later. But I really hope throughout the course of this talk or throughout sometime today that you take a second to consider what bravery looks like for you. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Now, I'm going to rewind my own story slightly because obviously no one is actually asked to run for lieutenant governor completely out of the blue. So 8 years ago, I did a different thing that scared me. I ran for Utah Library Association president, which honestly was my first real leadership experience. Having been told by multiple people I should pick one thing to focus on, I made advocacy my platform, and I recruited the world's best advocacy chair, Peter Bromberg, who you can see on the middle of the slide right here. And we got to work building relationships with the members of the Utah State Legislature, showing up at the Capitol and advocating for library funding and library issues. And when library bills were on the table, which they were a lot after 2020, we met with our elected officials to try and give them the librarian perspective and talked about how some of these bills would either help or hurt the library. And in 2022, I co-founded the organization Let Utah Read with other organizations that cared. We brought together the Utah Library Association, Every Library, PEN America, ACLU of Utah, the League of Utah Writers, people who cared about libraries and books and the freedom to read. And through Let Utah Read, we built a listserv of over 8,000 people that we could turn up to speak in support of libraries and books. We wanted to make sure that the people who were fighting for the things that we cared about were as organized and vocal as the people who were looking to censor books. Now, library advocacy was not always comfortable for me, but I have to admit I never really felt like I wasn't the right person to be doing it. I have worked in public and academic libraries for the past 15 years, and I spent my entire life in libraries before that. Talking about libraries and the great work that we do, that feels natural to me. And talking about why it's important for kids to have access to diverse and challenging books, that is solidly in my wheelhouse. I had a much harder time, and honestly, I still do, seeing myself as a candidate or a politician. Now, this guy here, that is a politician. Now, admittedly, he is ChatGPT generated, but we're going to call him John. So John grew up in a political family. As a kid, he ran for student government. In high school, he excelled at speech and debate. After high school, John went off to college and majored in political science, and he had the incredible opportunity to intern at the Hinckley Institute of Politics. Now, predictably, after he graduated, John went to law school, and after a few years in private practice and being involved in his political party, he decided to run for office. Friends, I am nothing like John. I grew up in a blue-collar, very religious, working-class family where women were not exactly encouraged to be leaders. Instead of debate or student government, I played a lot of sports in high school, and I was absolutely terrified of public speaking. Seriously, I was afraid to even raise my hand in class. In college, I waited tables and I twisted balloons for a living. I didn't have the privilege of unpaid internships. And because I always paid my own bills and my tuition and I got derailed a couple times along the way, I didn't even finish my undergraduate degree until I was 29 years old. And my master's degree is in library science, not law or policy. I didn't fit the mental model of what I thought a politician looked like. But on the campaign trail, I realized that there are a lot of different types of people who run for office. And it's actually the ones with the more unusual paths that were always the ones that inspired me. Now, this is my good friend, John Arthur here. John is a fifth grade teacher at Meadowlark Elementary in Salt Lake City. And he's not just any teacher. John was the 2021 Utah Teacher of the Year. But when our legislature started passing bills that undermined public education, John decided that he needed to run for state school board. And this other person here, this is my friend Stacy Bernal. Now, like me, Stacy is an autism mom, and she got into politics fighting for the accommodations that her son needed. Stacy serves on the Ogden School Board, and she's the founder of Awesome Autistic Ogden, which she has run every year since 2018. And last year, Stacy ran for state senate. Now, these are the candidates that I love, the ones who never planned on running. People like me who are simply frustrated with the status quo and realize that they either needed to get involved in politics or be governed by those who do. Which brings us, finally, to my first lesson learned from the campaign trail. I did not need to be perfectly qualified, and I did not need to be ready. I was neither of those things. And in fact, as I now realize, I don't think you can be ready for that kind of thing until you just do the darn thing, which is true of so many things in life. I wasn't ready to be a mom until I had my first kid. And as much as I loved library school, I didn't start my first day at a professional job feeling prepared to hit the ground running. Now, there is a famous Hewlett-Packard study that found that women tend not to apply for a job unless they meet every single listed qualification. Now, men, on the other hand, on average, are willing to apply if they meet 60% of the listed qualifications. Rather than criticize men for overconfidence, I think that women in particular need to stop screening ourselves out of opportunities that, if given the chance, we would be great at. We need to believe in our ability to grow into the job, even if we aren't 100% ready or 100% qualified. And of course, it is not just women who do this. Recently, my husband wanted to apply for a job. And after listening to him list every single reason why he didn't think that he would get it, this brilliant man who graduated from the top of his class at Georgetown Law and who was a partner at a national law firm was feeling imposter syndrome. I looked at him and I said, babe, it is not your job to say no to you. You aren't the selection committee. It's your job to decide if you want the job and if you think you would be great at it. It is their job to say yes or no. All the growth, all the change happens when you do things that you aren't perfectly ready for or qualified to do. Okay, so I didn't have to be perfectly qualified and I didn't have to be ready to run for lieutenant governor, but I did need to have the requisite hours in the day. Now, in my normal life, I am a full-time working mom with 3 kids and tons of other service commitments. Squeezing in a statewide campaign would normally be completely out of the question based on logistics alone. But over the past 5 years, pretty much since the beginning of the pandemic, boundaries have been my personal project, and I've done quite a bit of speaking on this issue. Now, after a lifetime of 0 boundaries and lots of burnout, I started intentionally doing a few things. 1, prioritizing things that fill up my own tank, things like hiking or journaling or working out. Not every day, but almost. 2, as a rule, I stopped saying yes to things automatically. 3, paying very close attention to what a yes and a no feel like inside of my body and looking inside of myself for answers instead of polling everyone around me. And lastly, 4, using criteria for what a yes is going to be. And you all can't see it at home, but I actually have a poster in my office behind my computer that says, Rebekah, before you say yes, 1, are you deeply inspired by this work? 2, does it tap into your particular talents? And 3, does it meet a significant need in the world? If the answer to any of these things is no, the answer is no. This is not your work. I will respect my time enough to reserve it for where I'm able to make my highest contributions. And I bring this up because in 2023, I set a big boundary. I applied to go on a year-long sabbatical from the University of Utah. And I had been eligible to go on sabbatical for a few years, but I kept putting it off. Why? Well, because I thought, if I leave, who's going to do my work? What's going to happen to Digital Matters? What if I leave and everything falls apart? And when I brought this up with an administrator at the University of Utah, she said, if we can't cover your work while you take a benefit that's available to you, that is an institutional problem. So in fall 2023, I applied. If I hadn't already created space in my calendar, I never would have been able to take advantage of Brian's offer to be his running mate. I had to prune to grow. And now, you guys, saying no is like my absolute favorite. Every time I say no to something, I find myself, wondering, like, what am I making space for? What yes is there out there to be excited about? It has been so incredibly life-changing. Now, a closely related but distinct lesson I learned running for office is number 3. No one is going to protect your time except you. No one. Now, as previously mentioned, I used to say yes to absolutely everything. I am a classic people-pleasing optimist who hates confrontation and all too often defines my worth by my productivity. I am 100% wired for yes, in a profession that is wired for yes. And that has led to me being in all kinds of trouble with being overcommitted or even resenting the people making demands of me. I mean, don't they know how busy I am? Do you want to know the answer to that? No, they don't. How could they? Only you know your capacity and schedules and current commitments, both inside and outside of your work. It is your job to protect your time and no one else's. Now, this lesson became crystal clear to me last year. Campaigns are crazy. There is no end to the work. There's always another dollar to raise and another vote to go out there and get. 10 hours a week, I was just calling people and asking for money. 4 to 5 nights a week, we were at fundraisers, meet and greets, picnics, showing up for down ballot candidates. Every single Saturday, I was either walking in a parade or canvassing or both. There were debates and media interviews and weekly meetings with my campaign strategy team and my fundraising team and my social media manager. It was nuts. My team, bless them because they are amazing and good at their jobs, would extract as much time and energy as I was willing to give them. It was my job to let them know when I needed time for my family or time for myself. Because yes, campaigns are important, but so are my kids. So is my marriage. So is my mental health. And that lesson is just as true off the campaign trail as it was on the campaign trail. Lesson number 4, find new ways to define success. So the week I agreed to run, my super sweet, beautiful 6-year-old son said to me with eyes shining, "Mom, I will be so proud of you if you win." And in my brain, I went, huh. As optimistic as I am, I was pretty eyes wide open about our odds of winning. Utah hasn't had a Democratic governor in 40 years. And Governor Cox was and is a relatively popular incumbent governor with a campaign budget an order of magnitude bigger than ours. Now, did I want to win? Absolutely. Was there a chance that we could win? I mean, yeah, sure, theoretically. Was it likely? No. So in that moment, I gave my son the biggest hug and I said, I will be so proud of myself if I do my best, if I work as hard as I can and I learn as much stuff as I can along the way. Everything else, buddy, that's just out of my control. That little conversation made me realize that I had to find new ways of defining success. It could not just be about one goal, but finding lots of ways to win along the way. So for me, winning was campaigning with my kids all summer and then watching my 9-year-old daughter run for student government that fall and winning her election before taking her into the voting booth to cast a ballot for her mom. Winning was talking to hundreds, if not thousands of people across the state, hearing their stories and calcifying my deeply held belief that most people are good and that we have more in common than not. Winning was gaining confidence and getting better at public speaking. A year ago, this talk would have completely terrified me. I would have practiced like 100 times. Now, I'm just feeling super excited to share. Winning was my Girl Scout troop, showing up to support me on election night, and literally hundreds of people texting me pictures of their ballots with the little filled out ovals saying that they were proud to vote for me. On October 16th, my own ballot arrived in the mail, and I excitedly took a picture and texted it to my mom and dad, to which my dad replied, as you can see here on this slide, "You have already won. Love, Dad." He was right. Okay, lesson number 5, something a little bit less heartwarming. Money. There is one part of running for office that almost every candidate dreads: fundraising. Sadly, there's just a lot more to being a good candidate than having a deep love for your community and a vision for how to make it better. To be considered a great candidate, you have to be able to raise money. Now, this was completely foreign to me. I didn't even like collecting late fees when I worked at the public library. I know how hard people work for their money. And if you come from a background like mine, $100 is a lot to ask of someone. And that was the minimum amount of money that I was allowed to ask for. Now, on a campaign, there are a lot of ways to raise money. And a major one, as I just mentioned, is just calling people and asking them, which in the campaign world is simply referred to as call time. First, I had to call all 1,184 contacts inside of my phone: friends, family, colleagues, high school acquaintances, ex-boyfriends, former professors, that mom I had a playdate with 5 years ago, everybody. Then, after that, I had to move on to calling reliable Democratic donors. And this whole process was absolutely excruciating. But I have to admit, it really works. Brian and I raised $750,000 in almost all small dollar donations through a mix of call time, events, mailers, email, text, and strategic meetings. I learned that despite the scarcity that I often feel in the library world, with good reason, the world is, to quote Ted Turner and my friend Peter Bromberg, awash in money. And this has really changed the way that I look at money now that I'm back in the regular world. In April, just for example, I was working on an NEH grant that got terminated by DOGE, and it was absolutely heartbreaking. But rather than just accepting it, I worked with my dean and my co-director to raise the money that we needed to finish the project through a mix of public and private donations. I had confidence that the money was out there, and it was. Now, a related fundraising lesson, number 6, for those of you who are counting along, is that you do not get what you don't ask for. Now, I did about 50 fundraisers in 2024. Sometimes Brian would ask for the money, sometimes I would do it, but often we would leave the task to the host of the party. Some of them were pros at asking for money. You could just see their comfort level and they'd be like, okay, whatever you're going to give, close your eyes and double it. And there were other people who would do the ask and they were super uncomfortable and apologetic. And a few times it was unclear who was supposed to ask for money and nobody ended up asking the attendees for anything. And it was amazing to me. The amount of giving was almost always directly correlated to the quality of the ask. Now, obviously, this lesson, you don't get what you don't ask for. It isn't just about money. Sometimes we can ask boldly for whatever it is that we want or need. And again, it is your job to make the ask. It's the other person's job to say yes or no. Okay. Lesson number 7, messaging. I am a huge fan of words. I love them. I always have. I love the complexity of long form, nuanced content that looks at an issue from every single angle and recognizes that nothing worth knowing can be summarized in a soundbite or a bumper sticker. Apparently, that makes me terrible at marketing. Now, one thing I had to learn on the campaign trail was how to make a message impactful and how to make it stick, usually in 30 seconds or less. And my team taught me the 3 pillars of good communication: clarity, connection, and consistency. Number 1, clarity. If I can't repeat your message, it's not clear enough. Even better, if my 9-year-old daughter can't repeat your message, it's not clear enough. That means we need to use smaller and fewer words. We need to strip away jargon, and we need to speak to values. Number 2, connection. You have to lead with your heart and your values. Now, I started off the campaign so worried that I didn't know every policy solution or intervention or best practice, especially campaigning alongside Brian, who had been thinking about policy and governance his entire adult life. He had served for 16 years in the Utah State Legislature. Now, my team would say to me, speak to your values. For example, when talking about free school lunches, I didn't need to have or regurgitate all the data on food insecurity or child poverty rates. I could simply say, children can't learn when they're hungry. Last, consistency. You have to repeat your message again and again and again, till honestly, it probably even starts to get a little boring for you. But that is the only way the message is going to stick. And just think about some of the best marketing campaigns. Just do it. Nike. Melts in your mouth, not in your hands. M&M's. The breakfast of champions. Wheaties. Messages don't just sell products, they reinforce important ideas. And I've really thought about this a lot when I'm talking about book challenges and censorship. Here are just a few of the lines that I use again and again. Libraries are for everyone. Free people read freely. Here's one that I borrowed from Shannon Hale, who I just adore. In cultures where even discussions of sex are taboo, predators thrive. We cannot allow the most conservative members of our community to dictate what all the rest of us get to read. Our messages need to be clear, they need to be authentic, they need to be short, and they need to be consistent. Okay, my final lesson learned. Number 8, librarians are uniquely and wonderfully suited for public office. When I first started my campaign, I thought it was kind of funny or strange to be a librarian running for lieutenant governor. And a lot of other people did too. Why? Because there just aren't that many of us in elected positions. Certainly not compared to the number of lawyers or real estate developers who are occupying those seats. But here is what I've come to believe. Our training and experience and values make librarians incredible candidates. Just consider your typical reference interview. We are trained listeners. Librarians know how to ask questions and how to dig deeper and how to find high quality information on pretty much any topic. We know that we don't need to have all the answers. We just need to know where to look. And we have the added benefit of having a pretty discerning eye for truth. As frontline public sector workers, librarians have a front row seat and a backstage pass to some of the biggest disparities in our society. Many of us work with students and veterans and small business owners and LGBTQ youth and unsheltered populations and immigrants and families of every variety. Our primary job is to listen to people and to help them be successful at whatever it is that they care about. What other profession is engaged with such diverse members of our community on a daily basis, trying to improve their lives? And can you think of any better preparation for public office than that? Now, not only that, but our jobs give us perspective on what the real problems are in our society. And we know that it's not the books our teens are checking out. Now, there was one section of my stump speech that I gave day after day after day that really highlights this well, I think, and so I'm going to do it here. So I got to tell you, I have read a lot of books in my life, like a lot of books. I didn't become a librarian by accident. And I don't think there is a single book in my public library that I would find offensive. I really don't. I don't think there is a single book in my kids' elementary school library that I would find offensive. One thing that I do find offensive in the library is that working parents have to drop their kids off there for 8 hours a day in the summertime because of a lack of affordable childcare options. I am not the least bit offended by Judy Blume or Margaret Atwood or Kurt Vonnegut or Toni Morrison. I am offended when my friend who has stage 4 cancer has to start a GoFundMe to pay for life-saving, necessary medical treatment. I am offended that 10% of kids in Utah go to bed hungry at night, and that the phrase student lunch debt even exists in our public school system. I am not offended by any work of fiction that reflects the hard realities of life that so many of us go through. I am deeply offended by the ever-widening gap between the magnitude of our problems and the smallness of our politics. We live in a society that is starved for authenticity, for moral leadership, for kindness. I think we can help. And by we, of course, I don't just mean librarians. I mean teachers and nurses and social workers and Girl Scout troop leaders and PTA presidents and anyone who cares deeply about our communities and our children and who want to see them inherit a more beautiful world. I'm going to ask again that you just close your eyes, and I want you to imagine yourself being brave. What does that look like for you? Maybe it is running for office. It doesn't have to be lieutenant governor. It could be running for your community or city council. It could be running for your school library board. Maybe it's writing that book that's been buried deep inside of your chest. Maybe it's asking for a promotion at your current job or going back and getting that degree that you've always wanted. The world needs us to show up in bigger and bolder ways than we have in the past. Now, our time here is pretty much up, but I wanted to end with a quote from Sharon McMahon's wonderful book, The Small and the Mighty, which I bet some of you have read, and if you haven't, I encourage you to go do so. Now, this book came out in September 2024, just 6 weeks before the election, and I listened to the last 6 minutes of this book, no joke, probably no less than 50 times, anytime I was looking for a dose of courage or inspiration. And as I considered how I wanted to wrap up this talk for today, I could think of no better words than these from Sharon McMahon in answering the question, when the reader finishes the last page and closes the book, what do you want them to know? Sharon says, I'd want you to know that the American experiment is full of ill-equipped people. People with the so-called wrong faces and the wrong life experiences who just went for it. They just tried something no one else had done before. They were willing to let other people watch them fail. They just did the next right thing. I would want you to know that there will come a moment in your life, a moment where you will be asked to choose, will I retreat or will I move forward with courage? You'll realize, just like the people in the chapters of this book, that every experience you've had, every setback and heartache, every triumph and joy will all be used. The character that you have been cultivating will be called upon. And when that moment comes, whenever it is, I hope you'll rise to it. I'd want you to know that for some of you, that moment is today. Thank you. Now I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen so that it's just me and Santabar. Hi.
Thank you so much, Rebekah. We really appreciate that wonderful presentation. And I think we just have a couple of follow-up questions to help the audience better understand the importance of having local community members and librarians running for office. So first, what advice do you have for local community leaders and librarians who want to run for office but don't know where to begin? What is that first step that they can sort of take?
That's such a great question. I have been asked that so many times since Election Day. I think people are really feeling this desire to get more involved. You know, when everything is running smoothly and we're not thinking about politics, it's easy to disengage and check out. But I think a lot of us are feeling like something's gone wrong and more of us need to step up. And so they're wondering how they can like level up their, civic participation and democracy. I actually just recently did a Substack post about this of like different ways that you can get involved. I mean, one way you can get involved is through your local political party. So through, I got involved as a precinct vice chair. Every other year, the Democratic Party in Utah does caucus night, and you can go and try to be a delegate or sign up to be a precinct chair or vice chair. That's like the smallest unit of government. I think it's like 1,000 households, and you can become the person mobilizing your community. Another way to get involved is through an issue that you care a lot about. If you're someone who cares about something like gerrymandering, then Better Boundaries would be like a great place to get involved. If you're someone who cares about reproductive rights, Planned Parenthood, if you care about, air quality, there's a great group. If you care about LGBTQ rights in Utah, it would be like Equality Utah or Utah Pride. There's different organizations. And I think so you can either get involved through an issue or through a political party. Or ask the most engaged person you know and see what their recommendations are.
That's wonderful. And I think that'll be helpful for a lot of people who are thinking about running for office or who want to level up their participation in civics in their community. What would you recommend candidates pay attention to in terms of library-related issues when they're running for office? What are there particular library issues that you specifically advocated for as a candidate yourself? And what do you think that other candidates should be paying attention to right now?
That is such a great question. And it's one that actually requires a little bit of homework sometimes because everybody says that they support libraries. Everybody says that they support public education. But sometimes you scratch an inch or a millimeter deep and you can see they are not doing things that support teachers and librarians. Oftentimes that starts with funding. Are they willing to fund and appropriately invest in that public infrastructure within their own communities? One of the places you can often go is For your state library association, so for us, it's the Utah Library Association, we have a pretty active advocacy committee, and we come out in support of different bills or in opposition to different bills based on whether or not they help libraries or hurt libraries. And it's actually pretty easy, although I'm sure most people don't do it, pretty easy to go in and check the voting record of different elected officials in your community. There are some where in two big bills that have affected Utah over the past 5 years are what I would consider our censorship bills. In 2022, that was HB 374, which they basically redefined obscenity and made it easier to remove books from library shelves. And then in 2024, it was HB 29. And that made it where basically if any 3 districts in the state ban a book, the entire state has to pull that book from their library collections and destroy it. And these books are including best-selling, award-winning, often Pulitzer Prize-winning authors, and books that no one would consider obscenity if they read the book in its entirety. Well, it's very easy to go to le.utah.gov and see who voted for those bills and who voted against those bills. And if you're not sure how to find that information, talk to a librarian. We can help you get there.
That is so great. And then the last question that I have is, if you are considering running for office again at some point in the future.
Yes. I mean, I jokingly say it kind of feels like when I had my first baby and I'm like, well, I learned so much. I can't let this knowledge go to waste. I have to have a second child, and then a third. But I kind of feel like that. I learned so much last year and I genuinely enjoyed the process. I know not everybody wants to run for office. Some people love being brave in different ways. But for me, when Brian asked me to run for lieutenant governor, I talked a little bit about deciding what gets a yes and what gets a no. And part of it is like what I feel inside my body. When he asked me, every part of me wanted to say yes. I'm like, we have got to make this happen. I was so grateful my husband was on board, that my library gave the thumbs up on it, as long as I followed some very strict protocols on keeping work and politics separate. But when I feel like that again, then I'll run again.
That is so great to hear, and we can't wait to see what you do next.
Awesome. Thank you, Santabar. And thank you, everybody. This has been great.
Thank you so much, Rebekah, and thank you to everyone who's joining us on our Facebook Live. Please be sure to tune into our other presentations to help celebrate the civic season. Thank you.
Thanks.